Here is a silence between stars that most species never truly hear. It is not the absence of sound, for sound requires medium and the void offers none, but rather the weight of distances so vast that even light grows old in the crossing. In that silence, civilizations are born. They flourish. They reach toward one another with hopeful signals, or they turn inward, content in solitude. And sometimes, in that ancient quiet, they die.
I have listened to that silence for 417 years. My name is Velketh Soren, and I am the last surviving member of the 9th conclave of the Rethani Sovereignty, a council that once governed 17 star systems and spoke for 42 billion souls. I have watched suns set over worlds that no longer exist. I have held the hands of friends as they faded into the nothing that claims us all. And I have learned, in these final days of my people, that the universe keeps secrets from those who believe they have already uncovered them all.
We were ancient when your species was young, when your ancestors first looked up at the night sky and wondered what those distant lights might mean. We had already catalogued them. We had named your sun, an unremarkable yellow dwarf in an unremarkable spiral arm, and dismissed it as unsuitable for serious consideration. The third planet was warm, wet, and teeming with primitive life, but our projections showed nothing of interest developing there for at least another 100 million years.
We were wrong, but I am telling this story out of order, as the old and the weary often do. Let me begin again, in the way that proper histories begin, not with endings, but with the moment when everything changed.
The Keth Vori came from the outer dark.
We had always known, in the abstract way that immortal civilizations know unpleasant truths, that something lurked beyond the galaxy's edge. Our long-range sensors had detected anomalies for millennia, gravitational distortions, energy signatures that matched no known physics, the occasional disappearance of deep space probes. We filed reports, we commissioned studies, we built monitoring stations that watched the void with tireless electronic eyes.
And then, 17 years ago, the void looked back.
The first attack came without warning. The outer reaches, a cluster of 12 colony worlds on the sovereignty's frontier, simply stopped transmitting. 31 billion Rethani, silenced in a single night. When our response fleets arrived, they found nothing but debris fields and the fading heat signatures of worlds that had been rendered molten.
I remember the emergency session of the conclave. I remember the faces of my colleagues, beings I had known for centuries, whose wisdom I had trusted absolutely, staring at the tactical displays with expressions I had never seen before. Fear, true fear, the kind that strips away pretense and leaves only the animal beneath.
"What are they?" Counselor Multhrin asked. Her voice, usually so steady, wavered like a flame in wind.
No one answered, because no one knew.
The Keth Vori were not a species in any sense we understood. They did not communicate. They did not negotiate. They did not even seem to register our existence as meaningful. They simply advanced, consuming everything in their path with a methodical efficiency that suggested either perfect strategy or complete indifference. Our weapons, technologies refined over 8,000 years of development, proved minimally effective. Our shields held for minutes rather than hours.
Our fleets, the pride of the sovereignty, were swept aside like dust before a wind.
In the first year, we lost the outer reaches. In the second, the mid-territories. By the 5th year, the HFY had penetrated the core systems, and the sovereignty, which had stood for 9,000 years, began to collapse.
I will not dwell on what came next. The memories are too fresh, too raw. The evacuation of Wraithen Prime, the fall of the Citadel of Voices, the battle of the Crimson Nebula, where we sacrificed 12,000 ships to buy 3 days of retreat time. I watched worlds burn. I watched friends die. I watched everything I had ever known crumble into ash and silence. And through it all, I asked myself the same question that haunted every survivor. Where could we go? Who could help us?
The galaxy is large, but the sovereignty had been its dominant power. The other civilizations we knew, the Thesauri Collective, the Myrthan Assembly, the Crystalline Accord, were either too weak to matter or too distant to reach. We had built our empire on the assumption that we would never need allies, because we would never face an enemy we could not defeat alone.
The universe, it seems, has a sense of humor about such assumptions. It was Counselor Brenthal who first suggested the unthinkable. We were aboard the Sanctuary Fleet, the last concentration of Rithani military power, protecting the few million survivors we had managed to evacuate, when he called an emergency session.
"There is one possibility we have not considered," he said, his ancient voice heavy with reluctance. "One region of space we have deliberately avoided."
"The quarantine zone," Malthrin said immediately. Her tone made clear what she thought of the suggestion.
"Yes, absolutely not. Counselor, those creatures are confined for a reason, Brenthal. Our ancestors watched them, studied them, and they determined unanimously that contact should be prohibited until such time as the species demonstrated sufficient development to warrant reassessment." Malthrin's eyes narrowed. That assessment was scheduled for another 3,000 years. I had remained silent during this exchange, but now I spoke. "What choice do we have?"
Both counselors turned to look at me. I was young by Rithani standards, barely 4 centuries old. My voice carried less weight than theirs. But the old hierarchies were crumbling along with everything else, and desperation has a way of equalizing perspectives.
"The humans," I continued, "were quarantined because our ancestors feared what they might become, because they saw something in that species that unsettled them. But the HFY are already here. They are already destroying us. Whatever threat the humans might pose, it is theoretical. The threat we face now is not." Silence followed my words. On the display screens behind us, tactical updates scrolled past. Another system fallen, another fleet destroyed, another million lives extinguished. The weight of it pressed down on us all.
"The humans are aggressive," Malthrin said finally. "Our observations have documented thousands of years of warfare among themselves. They are tribal, violent, short-lived, and prone to irrational behavior. Every model we have run suggests that contact with a species like ours would trigger hostility, not cooperation."
"Perhaps," Brenthal replied, "but those models were built on assumptions about a species we stopped studying 3 centuries ago. We have no idea what they have become since then."
"And if they have become worse?"
"Then we will have lost nothing we were not already losing."
The vote was not unanimous. Malthrin abstained, her face tight with disapproval. But the motion passed, and I was chosen, for reasons I still do not fully understand, to make first contact. Perhaps they thought my youth would make me less threatening. Perhaps they thought my relative inexperience made me expendable.
Or perhaps, in those final desperate days, it simply did not matter who went, as long as someone did.
I took a small diplomatic vessel and set course for the quarantine zone. The journey took 11 days. During that time, I reviewed everything our archives contained about the species I was about to meet. The files were extensive but dated. Our ancestors had studied humanity intensively during what the humans called their Bronze Age, a period of primitive metallurgy and tribal confederation. They had documented everything: social structures, religious beliefs, warfare patterns, technological development, and they had reached a unanimous conclusion. This species, the final report stated, demonstrates an unusual capacity for both cooperation and violence. Unlike most developing civilizations, they do not appear to be moving toward one behavioral mode or the other, but rather oscillating between extremes. Their potential for rapid advancement is significant, but so is their potential for self-destruction. Recommend quarantine and continued observation. Reassess in 5,000 standard years.
5,000 years. And in that time, while we watched from afar and congratulated ourselves on our wisdom, they had, what? Destroyed themselves? Stagnated? Evolved?
I was about to find out.
The first thing I noticed when my vessel crossed the boundary of the quarantine zone was the signal traffic. It was everywhere. Radio waves, microwave transmissions, laser communications, and other forms I could not immediately identify, all of it washing over my ship in an overwhelming flood of data. Our ancestors had documented a species that communicated through primitive acoustic vocalizations and occasional written symbols. This was something else entirely. The second thing I noticed was that they had detected me.
Within minutes of my arrival, a transmission reached my vessel, directed specifically at me, using protocols that should have been unknown to a species at their development level. Unidentified vessel, you have entered United Earth protected space. Please identify yourself and state your intentions. If you require assistance, emergency services are available on standard frequencies.
The message was in Rathani. I stared at the communication console for a long moment, struggling to process what I was hearing. They knew our language. They had identified my vessel's origin. And they were offering assistance?
This is Velketh Soron, I transmitted, my voice steadier than I felt. I am a representative of the Rathani sovereignty. I come seeking... The response came almost immediately. Representative Soren, welcome to Earth space. Please proceed to the following coordinates for customs processing and diplomatic intake. An escort will meet you shortly.
An escort? Customs processing? Diplomatic intake? These were not the words of a primitive species struggling to comprehend first contact. These were the words of a civilization that had done this before, many times perhaps.
What had they become?
The escort arrived within the hour. 2 vessels of a design I did not recognize, sleek and functional, with none of the aesthetic ornamentation the sovereignty favored. They took up positions on either side of my ship and guided me toward the inner system, toward the pale blue world our ancestors had dismissed as unremarkable. Earth. From orbit, it was beautiful. Blue oceans, green-brown continents, white swirls of cloud. The night side glittered with the lights of cities, far more lights than our ancient surveys had suggested were possible for a species at their documented development level. And in orbit, things were waiting.
Stations, dozens of them, perhaps hundreds, ranging from small observation platforms to massive constructs that dwarfed anything the sovereignty had ever built. Ships moved between them in constant streams, freighters, transports, vessels of unknown purpose.
and beyond Earth, visible on my long-range sensors, I could detect similar activity around other worlds. Mars, the moons of Jupiter, the asteroid belt.
They had expanded. In 3 centuries, they had gone from a single world to this.
Representative Soren, my console announced. Please dock at Station 14, Bay 7. A reception team is waiting.
I docked. The bay was clean, functional, unremarkable. A loading area like any other, with standardized connection ports and automated guide systems. But as I stepped out of my vessel and onto the station floor, I felt something I had not expected.
Gravity. Earth's standard gravity, heavier than the Rithani norm by a significant margin. My legs, adapted for lighter conditions, protested immediately. I had to focus to maintain my balance, to walk without stumbling.
The reception team was waiting just beyond the airlock. 3 humans, dressed in simple dark uniforms, stood in a loose semicircle. 2 of them held devices I assumed were data tablets. The third, a female by their morphology, stepped forward as I approached.
Representative Soren, she said. I'm Commander Elena Vasquez, United Earth Diplomatic Corps. Welcome to Earth. How was your journey?
The question caught me off guard. After everything, the dying worlds, the failed fleets, the desperate flight across half a galaxy, she was asking about my journey, as if I were a tourist rather than a refugee.
It was uneventful. I managed.
Vasquez nodded, a small movement of her head that I recognized from our ancient observation files. Human body language. They communicated as much through gesture and expression as through words.
Good. I understand you've come a long way. If you need rest before we proceed, accommodations can be arranged. Or, if you'd prefer to begin discussions immediately, we have a briefing room available.
Immediately, I said. Please. Time is limited.
Something shifted in Vasquez's expression. The polite neutrality remained, but beneath it I sensed something else, a sharpening of attention, a subtle increase in focus.
I see. Then please follow me. She led me through corridors that were clean and efficient, neither luxurious nor austere. Other humans passed us occasionally, workers, technicians, what appeared to be military personnel, and each one glanced at me with undisguised curiosity before continuing on their way. They did not stare. They did not seem afraid. They simply noticed me, acknowledged my presence, and moved on.
The briefing room was a modest space, a table, several chairs, display screens on the walls. Vasquez gestured for me to sit, and I did, grateful to take the weight off my struggling legs. She sat across from me, folded her hands on the table, and waited.
The silence stretched. I realized after a moment that she was waiting for me to speak first, to explain why I had come. It was a negotiating tactic, one I recognized from our own diplomatic traditions. Give nothing away. Let the other party reveal their position.
But I was too tired and too desperate for games.
My people are dying, I said. The Rithani sovereignty, our empire which has stood for 9,000 years, is being destroyed. We are being destroyed. And I have come here, to a species we once dismissed as primitives, to ask for help.
I expected surprise, satisfaction perhaps, maybe even contempt. What I got instead was something far more unsettling.
Vasquez simply nodded, as if I had confirmed something she already knew.
The HFY, she said. It was not a question.
I stared at her. You know of them?
We've been tracking the situation for some time. The destruction of your outer reaches, the fall of the mid-territories, the evacuation of your core systems. She paused. We know about the sanctuary fleet. We know about the survivors.
How? We... I stopped, struggling to process. We have not communicated with any outside power. Our transmissions have been encrypted, our locations concealed.
Representative Soren. Vasquez's voice was gentle, almost kind. You've been broadcasting distress signals for 17 years. Your encryption is good, but it's not unbreakable. And your locations, she gestured vaguely. Space is large, but it's not infinite. When something the size of the Keth Vori incursion happens, it leaves marks, energy signatures, debris fields, refugee flows. We noticed.
You noticed? I repeated. You noticed, and you did nothing?
What would you have had us do?
The question hung in the air between us. I wanted to be angry. I think I was angry, somewhere beneath the exhaustion and the fear. But her tone carried no mockery, no accusation. She was asking sincerely.
The Rethani sovereignty, Vasquez continued, classified humanity as a quarantine species 3,000 years ago. You placed monitoring stations around our system. You documented our development, decided we were too primitive and too dangerous to contact, and left us alone, which, for the record, we appreciated. We weren't ready for galactic politics back then. But the arrangement was clear. You watched, we ignored the watchers, and neither side interfered with the other. She spread her hands. So when your war began, we observed. We documented, we prepared, but we did not interfere. That was the agreement, wasn't it? Non-interference? I had no answer. Because she was right. The quarantine had been our decision, our policy, our choice. We had looked at humanity and decided they were beneath our notice. And now, I am asking you to interfere now, I said finally. I am asking for help. We have nowhere else to go. Vasquez studied me for a long moment. In her eyes, I saw something I had not expected. Compassion. Not pity. Pity I would have resented, but genuine understanding. As if she knew, personally, what it meant to watch your world end. How many survivors? She asked. 4.3 million out of 42 billion. She closed her eyes briefly. A human grief response, I realized. She was mourning for people she had never met, a civilization she had never known. I'm sorry, she said. Truly. Can you help us? She opened her eyes. That's not my decision to make, Representative, but I can take you to the people who can make it, if you're willing. I am willing. I am willing to do whatever is necessary. Vasquez nodded and rose from her seat. Then let's not waste time. The Council is expecting us. The journey from the station to Earth's surface took less than an hour. A shuttle, sleek and silent, carried us down through the atmosphere while I watched through the viewport, trying to reconcile what I saw with what I remembered from our ancient surveys. Cities, vast cities, spreading across continents, glittering with light and activity. Transportation networks linking them together, railways, roadways, what appeared to be maglev systems far more advanced than our projections had anticipated. And everywhere, the signs of a civilization that had not merely survived, but thrived. 300 years? I murmured, half to myself. How did you advance so quickly? Vasquez glanced at me. Quickly? This is slow for us. We spent most of the last century rebuilding after the climate crisis. Set us back at least 50 years. You nearly destroyed yourselves? Several times. She said it matter-of-factly, without shame or pride. We're good at that. Also good at not quite finishing the job. I thought of the wars our ancestors had documented, the constant conflict, the tribal violence, the seemingly endless cycle of destruction and rebuilding, and I wondered, for the first time, whether we had misunderstood what we were seeing. The shuttle landed on a platform atop a massive structure, a governmental building of some kind, I assumed, given the security presence and the formal architecture. Vasquez led me through corridors again, past more humans who nodded respectfully but did not stare, until we reached a large chamber filled with tiered seating and dominated by a central speaking floor.
The Council.
Perhaps 50 humans were present, representing different regions and organizations, I assumed. They watched as Vasquez brought me to the center of the floor, and I felt the weight of their attention. Not hostile, not friendly, simply evaluating.
An elderly human male, seated at the highest tier, spoke first. Representative Velketh Soren of the Refani Sovereignty, you are welcome here. I am Secretary General Chen Wei of the United Earth Council. Please speak freely. Tell us why you have come.
I told them about the Kethvori, their sudden appearance, their implacable advance, the devastation they had wrought. I told them about the battles we had fought and lost, the worlds we had evacuated and abandoned, the billions of lives that had been extinguished. I told them about the sanctuary fleet, drifting now in the darkness between stars, carrying the last remnants of a civilization that had once believed itself eternal.
And I told them about the Conclave's decision, about the quarantine we had imposed on their species, about how we had watched them for millennia, judging them unworthy of contact, and how that judgment had been revealed as arrogance only when we needed what we had dismissed.
I did not beg, I did not plead. I simply laid out the truth, all of it, and waited for their response.
The chamber was silent when I finished. The counselors exchanged glances, communicated in subtle gestures I could not interpret. Finally, Secretary General Chen leaned forward.
Representative Soren, I appreciate your honesty, and I want you to understand that we bear no grudge for the quarantine. We were, as Commander Vasquez noted, not ready. Perhaps you were right to leave us alone. He paused. But I need to ask you some questions before we can proceed. Is that acceptable?
Of course. The Kethvori. Your reports describe them as an overwhelming force. Your fleets, and by all accounts you possessed one of the most powerful militaries in the galaxy, were defeated with minimal losses on their side. What makes you think we can do any better?
It was the question I had feared, because I did not have a good answer.
I do not know that you can, I admitted, but we are out of options. The other civilizations we know are too weak or too distant. You were the unknown variable. We hoped, perhaps foolishly, that you might have developed capabilities we did not anticipate.
And if we haven't, then we will die. And perhaps you will too, eventually. The Kethvori do not appear to distinguish between species. They consume everything.
Chen nodded slowly. Tell me about your military, Representative. Your weapons, your tactics, your force disposition. Not to criticize, to understand. How did you fight them? I described our approach. The massive fleet engagements, bringing thousands of warships to bear against the Kethvori incursions, the planetary defense systems, the orbital fortifications, the ground-based weapons platforms, the energy weapons, the kinetic bombardment systems, the quantum disruptors that represented the pinnacle of our technological development. When I finished, Chen turned to a younger woman seated near him. Admiral Torres, your assessment? The woman, Torres, had been listening with intense focus. Now she spoke, her voice crisp and analytical. Classic force-on-force doctrine.
concentrate superior firepower at points of contact, overwhelm through sheer volume. It's effective against conventional opponents, but against an enemy that doesn't play by conventional rules. She shook her head. They were fighting the last war. The Keth Vori simply didn't care about losing ships, so attrition-based strategies failed.
Could we do better? Chen asked.
Torres was silent for a moment. Potentially, but I'd need more data on Keth Vori behavior, capabilities, and, most importantly, motivation. Representative Soren, in 17 years of conflict, have you ever attempted to communicate with them, to understand what they want? They do not communicate, I said. They do not respond to any signal, any frequency, any medium. They simply attack.
They don't respond. But have you tried to understand them?
Understand what? They are destroyers. They consume. What more is there to understand? Torres exchanged a look with Chen. Something passed between them, a shared understanding I could not quite grasp.
Everything, she said quietly. There's always something to understand.
The session continued for several hours. Questions about the sovereignty's history, our technology, our society. Questions about the Keth Vori, their numbers, their vessel types, their patterns of advance. Questions I could answer easily, and questions that exposed the limits of our knowledge. Through it all, I noticed something strange. The humans were not panicking. They were not dismissing our crisis as hopeless. They were analyzing, gathering information, as if they were solving a problem rather than facing a catastrophe.
Finally, Chen called a recess. Representative Soren, we need time to deliberate. Commander Vasquez will escort you to quarters where you can rest and refresh yourself. We will reconvene in 6 hours.
6 hours. The fate of my people decided in 6 hours. Vasquez led me through more corridors, to a comfortable suite of rooms with a window overlooking the city. She showed me how to operate the facilities, shower, food synthesizer, communication system, and prepared to leave.
"Commander," I said, stopping her at the door.
Yes? What do you think they will decide?
She hesitated. That's not for me to say. But you have an opinion.
A pause. Then, quietly, I think Secretary General Chen lost his son to the climate crisis. Admiral Torres lost her entire family in the Pacific collapse. Every person in that room has lost someone, to war, to disaster, to the 1,000 small catastrophes that shaped us into what we are. She met my eyes. We know what it means to watch your world end, Representative. We know it very well.
She left, and I stood at the window, watching the lights of the city flicker in the darkness, and wondered what that knowledge might mean.
I did not sleep. I could not. Instead, I watched the city through the long hours of the night, observing the patterns of light and movement, trying to understand the species I had come to ask for salvation.
They never stopped. That was the first thing I noticed. Even in what should have been resting hours, the city remained active. Vehicles moving, lights burning, people visible in windows and on streets. A species that had not learned to conserve energy, I thought at first. But then I realized they simply had energy to spare. The power consumption implied by what I was seeing was staggering, far beyond what our projections had suggested a species at their development level could sustain.
How had they done it? How had they gone from burning fossil fuels to this in 3 short centuries?
The answer, I would learn later, was simple. They had almost destroyed themselves, and they had learned from it.
The climate crisis that Vasquez had mentioned, the near catastrophe that had threatened to make their world uninhabitable, had forced them to revolutionize their energy systems. Fusion power, solar collection, geothermal extraction, technologies they had developed with desperate speed because the alternative was extinction.
They were good at not quite finishing the job of destroying themselves, and in that narrow space between disaster and survival, they had become something new.
Morning came. Vasquez returned and led me back to the council chamber. The atmosphere was different now, more focused, more intense. The councilors had clearly not slept either, and their faces showed the marks of difficult deliberation. Chen spoke first. Representative Soren, we have reached a decision, but first I need to ask you something.
Ask. You said your people have 4.3 million survivors. What would you give to save them?
The question startled me. Anything. Everything.
Would you give us information about the Kethvori? Everything you have, every data point, every observation, every scrap of intelligence you've gathered in 17 years of war.
Yes. Would you give us access to your technology, your weapons systems, your defensive capabilities, your propulsion systems? Yes. Would you fight alongside us? Would your people, your fleets, your soldiers integrate into a unified command structure under human leadership? I hesitated at that. Human leadership. A species we had quarantined, a species we had dismissed as primitives, commanding our forces? The humiliation would be significant. Yes, I said, if that is what is required.
Chen nodded. Good, because that's what's required. He stood. Representative Soren, humanity will help your people. We will offer you sanctuary, we will share our resources, and we will fight the Kethvori alongside you. But we will not do it halfway. If we're going to war, we're going all in. And that means we need complete cooperation, complete transparency, and complete trust.
You have it.
Then let me tell you what happens next. Chen's voice hardened, took on an edge I had not heard before. Admiral Torres. Torres rose and walked to a display screen on the wall. She touched it, and the screen came alive with star maps, tactical diagrams, and resource allocations. Over the past 6 hours, she said, we've analyzed the data you provided and developed a preliminary strategic assessment. The Kethvori are formidable, more formidable than anything humanity has faced. But they're not invincible. They have patterns, weaknesses, blind spots, and we're very good at exploiting those. She pointed to a section of the map. Your sanctuary fleet is currently here, in the void between systems. That's smart, it makes them hard to find, but it's not sustainable. They're running low on resources, and the Kethvori are systematically searching for them. We estimate 3 weeks, maybe 4, before they're located and destroyed. The words hit me like a physical blow. 3 weeks. 4. Everything I had been trying not to think about, laid out in cold, clinical terms. What we propose is this, Torres continued. We move your survivors here, to the Sol system. We have room. Mars is sparsely populated, and we've been developing the outer system habitats for decades. 4 million refugees is a logistical challenge, but it's manageable. And the Kethvori? I asked. They will follow. We're counting on it. Torres smiled, and there was something in that smile that made me uneasy. Representative, the Rithani sovereignty fought the Kethvori with honor, with courage, with all the strength of a great civilization. But you fought them the way you'd fight any enemy, with direct confrontation, with overwhelming force, with the assumption that superior numbers would eventually prevail. She paused. We don't fight that way. How do you fight? We adapt. We learn, we find the thing our enemy fears most, and we become that thing. Torres turned to face me fully. Your ancestors quarantined us because you saw something in humanity that unsettled you, something dangerous, something that didn't fit your models of how civilized species should behave. Do you know what that was? I shook my head. We never stop. When we're beaten, we retreat. When we're hurt, we heal. When we lose, we learn. And then we come back. Her voice dropped to something almost soft. Your civilization has existed for 9,000 years. In that time, you've known peace, stability, prosperity. You built an empire that seemed eternal. But we've been fighting for survival since we climbed down from the trees. Every generation, a new threat. Disease, famine, war, climate, ourselves.
We've almost gone extinct a dozen times, and every time we've found a way through.
She turned back to the map. The Kethvori think they're fighting a civilization. They're wrong. They're fighting a species that has been at war with the universe since the day it was born, and we have never, ever stopped. The room was silent. I looked at Chen, at Torres, at the other counselors, and I saw something I had not seen before. Beneath the calm, beneath the politeness, beneath the civilized veneer, there was steel. Cold, hard, unyielding steel.
How long? I asked. How long until you are ready to face them?
Chen and Torres exchanged another look, and then Chen said something that I did not understand. Not then. Representative Soren, we've been ready for a long time. We've just been waiting for a reason.
The mobilization began immediately.
I had expected. I don't know what I had expected. Preparation, certainly. Planning. The gradual assembly of forces over months or years. The careful allocation of resources. The methodical buildup that characterized all major military operations.
What I got instead was something entirely different. Within hours of the Council's decision, signals were spreading across the Sol system, to military installations, to industrial centers, to population hubs on a dozen worlds and moons. And everywhere those signals touched, things began to move. Ships, thousands of them, emerging from hidden docks and concealed stations, forming up in precisely coordinated formations. Not warships at first, transports, freighters, construction vessels, but moving with a purpose that suggested careful planning, advanced planning, as if they had been waiting for this moment.
How is this possible? I asked Vasquez, who had remained at my side throughout the day. You made the decision hours ago. These deployments must have been prepared in advance.
Vasquez hesitated, then carefully. We've been watching the Kethvori for a long time, Representative. Longer than you might think. You knew this was coming. We suspected. The Kethvori didn't appear from nowhere. They came from somewhere, and that somewhere is beyond the galaxy's edge. Our long-range observation systems detected them decades ago, when they were still moving through the outer void. We had time to prepare. I stared at her. You prepared for this? For a war with an enemy you had never encountered, never communicated with, never... We prepared for the possibility. Vasquez's expression was unreadable. That's what we do, Representative. We prepare for possibilities. Because we learned a long time ago that the universe doesn't care about our plans. It sends what it sends, and we either adapt or we die. Over the following days, I watched as humanity transformed itself into something I could barely comprehend. The rescue fleet departed first, 100 vessels specially configured for long-range operation, carrying supplies and equipment for the sanctuary fleet. They would reach my people in 8 days, Vasquez told me. They would begin evacuation immediately. Meanwhile, in the Sol system, the real preparations were underway. Shipyards that had been building civilian vessels switched to military production with an efficiency that suggested long practice. Factories retooled, mining operations accelerated, and everywhere, people were moving, reporting for duty, volunteering for service, stepping into roles that seemed to have been prepared for them in advance. "Your people seem ready for this," I said to Torres during one of our many briefing sessions. "Almost eager." "We are." Torres did not pretend otherwise. "We've been at peace for a long time, over a century, but we never forgot what it meant to fight. Every generation we passed down the lessons, the training, the readiness." She paused. "Some of us wondered if we'd ever need it again. Others hoped we wouldn't. But all of us knew that if the moment came, we would answer."
Why? Why prepare for a war that might never happen?
Torres looked at me for a long moment. "Because once we weren't prepared, and we almost lost everything. The climate crisis, the water wars, the collapse. We came within a hair's breadth of extinction, and we survived only because a few people refused to give up." Her voice softened. "Never again. We swore that to ourselves, to our children, to our future. Never again would we be caught unprepared. Never again would we face destruction without the means to fight back." The evacuation of the Sanctuary Fleet took 3 weeks. I received updates daily, transmitted across the vast distances by communication systems I did not fully understand, faster than light somehow, though the humans declined to explain exactly how. My people were being brought to safety. The young, the old, the remnants of a civilization that had believed itself eternal, all of them traveling toward a small blue world in an unremarkable system where creatures we had once dismissed as primitives were preparing to fight for our survival. And as the refugees arrived, I watched humanity prepare for war. The fleet that was assembling defied my comprehension, not because of its size, though it was vast, perhaps 10,000 vessels of various classes, but because of its coherence. Every ship knew its place, every captain knew their role. The communications traffic was constant, but there was no chaos, no confusion. They moved like a single organism, coordinated by something deeper than mere command structure.
"How?" I asked Torres. "How do you achieve this level of coordination? We had millennia to develop our fleet doctrines, and we never approached this."
"Practice," she said simply, "and a willingness to learn from our mistakes. We've fought a lot of wars, Representative, against each other, mostly. Every generation we learned something new, and we remembered." "You are a violent species." Yes, she did not deny it. We are. But violence is not the same as cruelty. We fight when we must, and we fight to win. But we take no pleasure in it. Every death is a failure. Every war is a tragedy. We've learned that, too, at great cost. She turned to face me. "The Kethvori kill without purpose, without regret, without meaning. They are destroyers, nothing more. But we fight for something, for our people, for our future, for the chance to build something better after the fighting is done." Her eyes met mine. "That's the difference, Representative. That's what your ancestors saw in us and feared. We are capable of violence beyond their imagining, but we are also capable of mercy, of compassion, of sacrifice. We are all of it, the light and the dark together, and when we commit to a cause—" She did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. "The Kethvori arrived 37 days after my first contact with humanity. They came through the outer system in a wave, thousands of vessels, black and angular, moving with the same implacable purpose they had shown throughout their campaign against the sovereignty. They did not pause. They did not investigate. They simply advanced, heading directly for Earth, for the concentration of life signs and energy signatures that marked humanity's heart. I was aboard the command vessel, the UES Defiance, Admiral Torres's flagship, when the first contact occurred. The bridge was a study in controlled tension, officers at their stations, displays filled with tactical data, Torres herself at the center, watching everything with Predator's eyes.
"Fleet status?" she asked, her voice calm.
All units report ready. Defense platforms online. Ground installations armed.
Very well. Torres turned to me. Representative, I want you to watch what happens next. Watch and remember. And when this is over, I want you to tell your people what you saw.
What am I going to see? She smiled, that same unsettling smile I had seen before. You're going to see us do what we do best. Survive.
The battle began at the edge of the solar system, not with a direct confrontation, but with something far more subtle. The human fleet did not advance to meet the Kethvori. Instead, they fell back, drawing the enemy deeper into the system, past prepared positions that erupted with fire at precisely coordinated moments. Mines, concealed weapons platforms, automated defensive systems that targeted the Kethvori flanks and rear, disrupting their formation, forcing them to divide their attention. The humans were not fighting like the Rithani had fought. They were not trying to overwhelm with superior firepower. They were harassing, probing, testing.
What are they doing? I asked. Why aren't they engaging directly?
Watch, Torres said. I watched, and slowly I began to understand.
The Kethvori were predictable. Terrifyingly powerful, yes, but predictable. They responded to threats with overwhelming force, always advancing, never retreating. The humans exploited that. Every attack, every feint, every ambush was designed to provoke a response, and that response revealed information: speed, maneuverability, reaction time, weapons capabilities, targeting patterns.
They're learning, I breathed. They're studying them.
In 17 years, you never tried this, Torres observed. You fought them head-on, matching strength against strength. You never took the time to understand them.
We were too busy dying.
Yes, and that's why we're doing it differently.
The running battle continued for 3 days. 3 days of skirmishes, ambushes, strategic withdrawals, and carefully calibrated engagements. The humans lost ships. I watched them die, flares of light on the tactical display that represented thousands of lives. But they never stopped learning. Every contact produced data. Every engagement revealed something new.
And then, on the 4th day, Torres gave an order that changed everything.
All units, execute Operation Prometheus. Authorization code, never again.
I did not understand what was happening at first. The human fleet had been scattered across the system, conducting its asymmetric campaign. Now, suddenly, it began to converge, not on the Kethvori directly, but on a point in space near the asteroid belt, an apparently empty region that I had not given any attention.
What is Operation Prometheus? I asked. Torres turned to face me. Representative, what I'm about to show you is classified. It's something we built decades ago when we first detected the Kethvori approaching our galaxy. Something we hoped we would never have to use.
A weapon. A response.
The displays shifted. The apparently empty region of space was not empty at all. It was occupied by something vast, something that had been hidden by some form of stealth technology I could not identify. And as the concealment fell away,
I saw it. A structure, massive beyond comprehension, stretching across thousands of kilometers of space. It looked almost organic, with curving surfaces and irregular protrusions, but it was clearly artificial. And at its heart, something was glowing, building in intensity, pulsing with energies I could not name.
"What is that?" I whispered.
"We call it the Forge," Torres said. 60 years ago, when we first detected the HFY, we asked ourselves a question. What would it take to stop something like them? Not just fight them, stop them permanently. She paused. The answer was uncomfortable. So we built it anyway, and we hid it, and we prayed we would never have to activate it.
What does it do?
It ends things.
The HFY had noticed the structure now. Their fleet, which had been pursuing the human forces across the system, began to converge on the Forge with single-minded intensity. Clearly, they recognized a threat when they saw one.
But they were too late. The Forge fired. I cannot describe what happened next, not in terms that would make sense. The energy that erupted from the structure was not light, not heat, not any form of radiation I understood. It was something else, something that existed in spectrums I had no names for. It washed over the HFY fleet like a tide, and wherever it touched, they came apart, not exploding, not burning, but dissolving. The molecular bonds that held their vessels together simply ceased to function. Ships that had shrugged off the most powerful weapons the sovereignty could bring to bear crumbled like dust in a wind. In minutes it was over. The HFY fleet, thousands of vessels, enough to destroy a galactic empire, was gone. Only debris remained, drifting in the void.
The bridge was silent. Officers stared at their displays, faces pale. Even Torres, who had known what was coming, seemed shaken by the magnitude of what she had just witnessed.
"It's over," someone said. "It's actually over." "No," Torres replied, her voice quiet. "It's not over. It's just beginning."
She turned to me. "Representative Soren, the weapon we just used, the Forge, it's a terrible thing. We built it because we had no choice, because the alternative was extinction. But we take no pride in it. Every time we develop something like this, every time we create a new way to kill, we diminish ourselves. We know that."
"Then why do you do it?"
Because the universe doesn't care about our morality. It sends what it sends. And if we want to survive, if we want the people we love to survive, we have to be willing to do terrible things. She closed her eyes. The HFY came to destroy. They succeeded against your people and others, but they made a mistake. They came to Sol. They came to Earth. They came to us. She opened her eyes, and in them I saw something I had not expected. Weariness. Deep, profound weariness.
And we do not forgive, we do not forget, and we do not lose.
In the aftermath of the battle, I learned more about humanity than I had in all my previous centuries of life.
They mourned their dead. Every ship lost, every life extinguished, they were remembered. Memorial services were held, names were recorded, families were notified. The victory, overwhelming as it was, did not erase the cost. It never could. And they helped my people. The Rathani survivors, 4.3 million souls, all that remained of a great civilization, were given homes, given resources, given opportunities to rebuild, not as subjects or servants, but as partners, as equals. Why? I asked Chen during one of our many conversations in the weeks that followed. Why help us after everything? We quarantined you, we dismissed you, we treated you as primitives.
Does that matter now?
It should, by any logic.
Logic, Chen smiled. Representative, if humanity lived by logic, we would have destroyed ourselves long ago. We survive because we choose to, because we refuse to accept the endings the universe offers us, and because, despite everything, we still believe that kindness matters, that compassion matters, that the way we treat others, even those who have wronged us, defines who we are.
He leaned forward. Your ancestors made a mistake. They saw our capacity for violence and assumed that was all we were. They didn't see the other side, the love, the sacrifice, the stubborn refusal to abandon hope even in the darkest moments. They saw monsters and built walls to contain us, but we were never monsters. We were survivors, and survivors know that the only way forward is together. I thought about that for a long time, about the sovereignty with its 9,000 years of history and its assumptions of eternal superiority, about the Kethvori with their mindless hunger and their implacable advance, and about humanity, young, violent, unstable, and yet somehow more alive than any species I had ever encountered. They were dangerous. My ancestors had been right about that. But they were also something else, something that defied easy categorization. Hope. They were hope in its most terrifying and beautiful form.
Months passed. The Rathani integrated slowly into human society, learning their ways, sharing our own. The cultural exchange was complex, sometimes painful, but ultimately rewarding. We had knowledge they lacked, 8,000 years of history, of technology, of philosophy. They had something we had lost, the fire of survival, the relentless drive to adapt and overcome.
And together we began to build something new.
The Kethvori incursion had not ended with the destruction of their fleet. There were more of them, out in the void beyond the galaxy. How many, no one knew. But they would come again. Sooner or later, they would come.
So humanity prepared. They always prepared. But this time, they were not preparing alone.
I worked with Torres, with Chen, with dozens of human leaders to develop new strategies, new technologies, new approaches to the threat that loomed beyond the stars. The Rathani contributed our knowledge, the humans contributed their adaptability, and slowly something emerged that was greater than either of us alone.
A year after the Battle of Sol, that was what they called it, though it had really been fought across the entire system, I was invited to address the United Earth Council. A formal ceremony, they said, recognition of the alliance between our peoples. I stood at the same speaking floor where I had first pleaded for help, and I looked out at the faces watching me. Human faces, Rathani faces, and a few others, species I did not recognize, newcomers drawn by word of what had happened here. 1 year ago, I said, I came to this world as a beggar, the last representative of a dying civilization, seeking salvation from a species we had once dismissed as primitives. I expected to be refused. I expected, at best, to be tolerated. I did not expect. I paused, searching for words.
I did not expect what I found. A species that had every reason to turn us away, but chose instead to embrace us. A species that had suffered as we had suffered and emerged not bitter but compassionate. A species that understood in ways my people never did what it truly means to survive.
I looked at Chen, at Torres, at Vasquez, who stood near the back of the chamber with a small smile on her face. My ancestors placed you under quarantine because they saw something in you that frightened them. They were right to be frightened. You are terrifying.
Not because of your weapons or your technology or your capacity for violence, though all of those are formidable. You are terrifying because you never stop, because you face the void and refuse to blink, because you have stared into extinction's eyes again and again, and every time you have said, "Not today."
The Rathani believed we were eternal. We believed our empire would stand forever, that our wisdom was unassailable, that we had mastered the universe and all its challenges. We were wrong. The universe broke us, as it breaks everything that grows too confident, too complacent, too sure of its own immortality.
But you were never confident, you were never complacent. You knew from the very beginning that survival was not guaranteed, and so you fought for it, every day, every generation. You built and rebuilt, fell and rose, died and were reborn. And when the darkness came for you, as it came for us, you met it with fire.
I straightened, feeling the weight of 400 years in my bones, the weight of all I had lost and all I had found.
My people gave you a warning long ago. We told you that the galaxy was vast and dangerous, and that you were not ready to face it. We were wrong about the last part. You were always ready. You were forged in fire, tempered by struggle, shaped by a million small apocalypses into something the universe had never seen before. The warning was clear. We told you to wait. We told you that you were too primitive, too dangerous, too unpredictable. We were right about the dangerous part.
I smiled, a human expression I had learned to mimic.
What followed was final. Not our ending, as we feared, but a new beginning. A partnership between the old and the young, the dying and the reborn. A future we never imagined, built on the ashes of everything we thought we knew.
I turned to face the full assembly.
Humanity gave us something the sovereignty never possessed: humility. The knowledge that we are not the center of the universe, that our wisdom is not absolute, that there is always more to learn. You gave us a second chance, and in return, we give you this promise.
When the darkness comes again, and it will come, we will stand beside you, not as supplicants, but as allies, not as refugees, but as family. The Rathani and the humans, together, facing whatever the universe sends our way.
I lowered my head.
You taught us what survival truly means. Now let us face the stars together and show the void what we have become.
The chamber erupted in applause. Human and Rathani voices mingled, a sound I had never heard before and would never forget. Afterward, as the ceremony ended and the delegates dispersed, Vasquez found me standing at a window, looking up at the stars.
"That was a good speech," she said.
It was the truth.
"That's what made it good." She stood beside me, following my gaze. "What are you thinking about?" "The future," I said. "The Kethvori are still out there. They will come again, perhaps in years, perhaps in decades, but they will come."
Yes.
Are you afraid?
Vasquez was silent for a long moment. Then, always, every day. Fear is part of being alive, but we don't let it stop us. We can't.
Your species is remarkable.
We're just people, Representative. Flawed, frightened, struggling to make sense of a universe that doesn't make sense. Just like you.
And yet you do things we could not. You face challenges we could not. You survive when we could not.
Vasquez shook her head. You survived, Representative. You're here. Your people are here.
Against all odds, against everything that tried to destroy you, you found a way through. That's not nothing, that's everything.
I considered her words. Survival. Such a simple concept, and yet so difficult to achieve. The Rathani had believed themselves survivors, but we had never truly been tested. We had built our empire on a foundation of safety, and when that foundation crumbled, we had nearly crumbled with it.
But not entirely. We had found help. We had found allies. We had found hope.
The warning was clear, I said softly. We told you to stay away. We told you that you were not ready.
And what followed was final, Vasquez replied. Not your ending, but ours. The end of our isolation, the end of our waiting, the end of pretending we didn't know what was coming.
You knew all along. We suspected. The universe is vast, and in that vastness there are things that want to consume everything they touch. We couldn't know when or where or how, but we knew something would come eventually. So we prepared, and when you arrived, desperate and broken, we saw our chance.
Your chance for what?
Vasquez turned to face me fully. To prove that we were ready, to show the universe that humanity would not be swept aside like the civilizations before us, and to find allies, real allies, who understood what it meant to face extinction and refuse to accept it.
She reached out and touched my arm, a human gesture of comfort, of connection.
You came to us as beggars, Representative, but you leave as family. And whatever comes next, we face it together.
I looked out at the stars again, the vast, uncaring cosmos that had destroyed so much, that had taken so many. It would send more challenges, more threats, more darkness.
But we would be ready, because the warning was clear. We had told humanity what we thought they were. Primitives, dangerous, quarantined for their own protection and ours. And what followed was final. Not our judgment of them, but their answer to us. An answer written in sacrifice and survival, in compassion and strength, in the quiet determination of a species that refused, absolutely refused, to give up. They had never needed our protection. They had never needed our approval. They had only needed time. Time to grow, time to learn, time to become what they were always meant to be. And now, standing beside them, I understood at last what my ancestors had seen and feared. Not violence, not aggression, not the savage impulses of a primitive species. Something far more terrifying. They had seen a species that would never, ever stop. A species forged by struggle, tempered by failure, strengthened by every catastrophe that should have destroyed them. A species that looked into the void and smiled. And they had known even then that when the darkness finally came for all of us, these small, fragile, impossibly stubborn creatures would be the ones who stood in its path.
Not because they were the strongest,
Not because they were the wisest,
but because they simply refused to lose.
The warning was clear. We told them what the universe was and what it would do to them. What followed was final. They listened, they prepared, and when the moment came, they answered with everything they had. And the darkness, for the first time in its ancient existence, began to fear.